Any time looking at information and understanding whether it's true or false is important in a more general sense. If we continually consume false information or misleading information, it slowly alters our worldview in ways that are kind of corrosive to democracy, to public decision making, and things of that nature. When we look at especially medical misinformation and misinformation in the time of a pandemic, there's this additional layer that we are often talking not about the long-term effects of disinformation and misinformation, but we're often talking about short-term effects that are quite quite daunting. When we look at, for example, when we look at the question of there was recently some misinformation that was spread about there having been community spread in California in the fall, right? Far preceding anything any scientist would agree with. Now, if people come to believe that really there's a lot more people immune than in everything's good to go, we could end up opening up the economy in ways that result in massive amounts of death. So these are things that, like I said, misinformation. A guy named Sam Weinberg and his team down at Stanford, and they found that fact checkers tend to look at sources and claims a little differently than the general public. The general public tends to dive into the material in front of them. They see an article, they see a graph, they tend to jump in and read it. They tend to jump in and see if it seems to make sense to them on some sort of common sense level. These are exemplified really in our SIFT model of the things that you want to do, not after you read something, not even during the point where you read something or react to something, but before you engage with it, so you know what you're actually looking at before you start to think about it. So one thing that the web has changed is there aren't a lot of other people doing your filtering for you. And very often the things that you're looking at come to you without the context you need to interpret them. So it's your job to reconstruct that context before you engage with them. Well, so what we have found, there were some previous models that were used in higher education. Probably the most famous one is called CRAP, CRAAP. But there are some other models called checklist models. These, by and large, don't work, at least for looking at things on the web. And what we tried to do in the design of SIFT was to address some of the flaws of those models. I could talk all day about this, but I'll just give you two of the things that we do differently. The first is we focus on the first 30 to 90 seconds that someone comes in contact with a piece of information. What can you do in that first 30 to 90 seconds? We certainly want people to engage in critical thinking, but we find that the biggest gap is not whether a person down the road engages with something in sort of a deep analytical way, but it's whether they build the habit to do these quick checks up front. So we've made everything very, 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 very quick. The second thing that we do that's different than CRAP is we get the students off the page, so to speak. So when someone comes to something like a photo, like a graph, like an article, like a website, whatever that piece of media is, we have them open up another tab, do some quick searching, find out not what this thing says about itself, but find out what other people are saying about this source, about this claim, really kind of zoom out. And those are the two principles that I think are very different than what we've often done in higher education. We're often encouraging students to zoom in, to dive deeply into something, to do close reading. And that has a place, but it only should be done once you've actually come to understand what you're actually zooming into. There's sort of this cultural phenomenon where to feel in control of something, we want to really convince ourselves that we can sort of just do the math ourselves without any sort of external expertise. look at an argument, sort of evaluate it, start to finish, and come to a conclusion as if we all are mini epidemiologists. But of course, we're not. And part of what we have to learn to do is quickly suss out who really is in a position to know about a given subject, through expertise, through being a firsthand witness, through whatever means, and whether we can trust them to tell the truth. So, in the modern world, your survival, the survival, of your friends, family, and surrounding society is based far less on your ability to play, weekend scientist, and far more on your ability to quickly figure out, who is worth your attention on a given. It's important when you come to something and you start to react to it. If you feel strong emotion, a strong desire to share, surprise, whatever it is, whatever that strong feeling is, stop and ask yourself if you really know what you're looking at, right? So often we react to things that we see, as if we knew who the person saying it was, as if we knew whether, as it, as if we knew whether the claim that we just learned of 2 minutes ago was widely accepted or very fringe. And we of course, a lot of times we don't know that. We actually don't have any context. So the first thing is, just when you start to react to something, stop and say, do I really know what I'm looking at? And then you go into the other steps, and briefly, those are: investigate the source, find better coverage, and trace claims, quotes, and media to the original context. And these are sort of a sequence for most people. Meaning, if you go and you look at something, say someone says, let's just take a simple claim. They say, deaths up by 40 in New York City today, or something like that. Well, okay, that's a claim, and if the person sharing that, right, is, say, the New York Department of Health, if you check out what the source, you say, well, that's in a position to know. Or if the person sharing that is a health reporter for the Wall Street Journal, you say, yeah, that person is in a position to know. I'm probably done here. But if the person sharing that is a, I don't know, is a usually a Twitter comedy account, or a celebrity from your favorite movie, that source by itself is probably not enough. You're gonna have to go further and verify that through another. So it's one of those things where you ask an expert on anything, and they always answer, it depends. And so it depends. It depends what your relationship is with that person. It depends. It depends on the severity of the error. But we do find that when people post correcting comments as a reply to something that is false or erroneous, that it does reduce the spread of that piece of misinformation. That is, that other people come to it, and not everybody, but enough people see that comment that you've made, the link to Snopes, that it puts a little bit of a drag on the spread. So if you can do it, if it's appropriate to you, if you have that relationship, or if you just see Woody Harrelson or something sharing something, some celebrity, Kim Kardashian, sharing something that's wrong, and you want to correct it, I would say if you feel that you can correct it, go ahead and correct that. Not necessarily for the person that's posted it, but more for the other people that are. So people ask me this a lot, and absolutely, if there is not clear communication from trustworthy official channels, it's more challenging for people to navigate this stuff. But the basic principles are the same. So for example, we talked about investigate the source before. And in an ideal world, official sources on public health would just be trustworthy. You wouldn't necessarily have to go outside of those. But in this case, if for various reasons those sources have not been trustworthy, the step after that's find better coverage. And the idea of this is, sort of see what other people say. So if what you find is that the official source says one thing and the consensus of medical experts is another thing, well, you gotta stop. You gotta figure out why that might be, and make a decision on that. And the same thing goes for tracing the T in SIFT, is trace claims, quotes, and media to the original context. And very often we do find that politicians will cite research, or coverage, or events in a way that when we actually trace it to the original reporting, the original research, the original finding, it turns out it's been misrepresented. So I do think that there are particular challenges when the sorts of people that would generally be seen as trustworthy or not. But the principle is still the same. What we're trying to do is if we can zoom out and say, okay, well, so that's what I'm hearing from this one source. Like, overall, though, where do medical professionals in this particular subcategory, where do they fall on this issue? And is what I'm hearing something that's in the mainstream? Is it something that's a significant but important minority opinion? Or is it something that's just out? Well, you can go to infodemic.blog. We've tried to make this as short as we can. I will say I started January 2017. I wrote a little mini textbook on it. And that has, over time, we have whittled that further and further down. The infodemic.blog site is literally something you could do. You could go through it in about 40 minutes tops, and learn these skills and practice them. And then, what really works is, once you learn these skills, it's like anything else. You just gotta practice them as a habit, and you start to find that you get better at this, not because you're spending more and more effort on it, but because it becomes almost effortless. It becomes like second nature to you. What I find now, for example, on investigate the source, we talk about some of the methods, right? A simple investigate the source method is hover over the source before you share it. If you haven't actually hovered over it to see who it is, like, you shouldn't be sharing it, right? And that's something that becomes muscle memory. Like, you go to click that share button, and then you're like, well, wait a second, I haven't even hovered over the source, or if you're on mobile, click through to the profile, and I can't hit the share button before I at least go that far, right? We get into other things that are a little more complex, like news search, cross-check. But again, these are simple things that what you actually do in these situations. The actual move of, like, selecting some text, right clicking, and searching Google on it, the actual move is like a 3-second, 4-second move. And once you kind of get that hook from that habit, you find that you just do it automatically, the same way you check your mirrors before you switch lanes on the highway, or check your rear view mirror before you back up. So part of the idea here is not making this more effortful. I really want it to be more effortless. I want it just to be habits that we practice.